I used to believe that school was simply a stage of life you had to survive, a narrow hallway you walked through with your head down, waiting for someone to hand you permission to leave. Every morning my alarm rang at 6:30, the same sharp digital tone cutting through my sleep, and I would lie there staring at the ceiling wondering a question I was almost afraid to say out loud. Why am I doing this? Not in a dramatic way, not with rebellion in my heart, but in a quiet, persistent whisper that followed me through the day. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever been busy every hour, surrounded by assignments and expectations, yet still felt strangely disconnected from your own future? At school, I blended in perfectly. My grades were decent, my attendance record was clean, my teachers described me as capable but inconsistent. I completed projects on time, studied just enough to pass exams, and nodded when adults talked about preparing for success. But inside, something felt hollow. I wasn't chasing a dream, I wasn't building a vision, I was simply reacting to deadlines. Homework felt like a burden I had to carry, not a tool I could use. Tests felt like threats, not milestones. I counted down the days until weekends, then counted down the weeks until summer, as if freedom only existed when school paused. Is that really education, or is that just endurance? The truth is painful but simple. When you study without a goal, you become controlled by circumstances. Your motivation depends on mood. If you feel inspired, you work hard. If you feel tired, you procrastinate. If you feel bored, you disconnect completely. Discipline becomes unstable because nothing anchors it. You measure success by avoiding failure. You celebrate when something is over instead of when something is mastered. You focus on surviving each semester instead of shaping the person you are becoming. I remember one afternoon in chemistry class, staring at equations written across the whiteboard. The symbols blurred together, and my mind drifted somewhere far beyond the classroom walls. I asked myself a dangerous question. If grades disappeared tomorrow, would I still care about understanding this? The silence inside me answered honestly, probably not. That realization unsettled me. It meant I was not driven by curiosity, not guided by purpose, but pushed forward by external pressure. I wasn't building anything meaningful. I was maintaining an image. Everything began to change because of a simple conversation. One evening, I ran into an old friend at a small coffee shop near campus. We had grown up together, shared classes, complained about homework, laughed about teachers. But that night, he felt different. There was clarity in the way he spoke, a quiet intensity behind his words. When I asked how school was going, he didn't shrug like I expected. He described his long-term goal in detail. He explained the career he was aiming for, the internships he was applying to, the skills he was intentionally developing. He talked about books he was reading beyond assignments, mentors he was reaching out to, projects he was building on his own time. Listening to him was both inspiring and uncomfortable. Why uncomfortable? Because I realized we were sitting in the same classrooms, using the same textbooks, hearing the same lectures, yet we were living completely different experiences. He was building towards something. I was drifting. He saw each class as preparation. I saw each class as obligation. He evaluated assignments by asking, "How will this move me forward?" I evaluated them by asking, "How fast can I finish?" The difference was not intelligence. It was direction. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my mind. What do I actually want? Where am I heading? If I continue exactly like this for 5 years, who will I become? The answers frightened me. I imagined graduating with average results, taking a job that paid the bills but drained my spirit, telling myself I was lucky because at least it was stable. Stable is not the same as fulfilled. Busy is not the same as meaningful. Safe is not the same as alive. The next day I sat at my desk with a blank sheet of paper. No music, no phone, no distractions. Just silence and a pen. At the top I wrote, "Who do I want to become?" At first nothing came. My mind offered safe answers. Make money. Be successful. Make family proud. Those goals sounded impressive, but they felt borrowed. They did not spark energy inside me. So I kept writing. I asked different questions. What makes me lose track of time? What conversations excite me? What problems do I naturally want to solve? Slowly patterns emerged. I loved explaining ideas. I loved turning complex topics into simple language. I loved writing stories that made people reflect. Whenever classmates struggled with a concept, I felt genuine satisfaction helping them understand it. Could that be more than just a personality trait? Could that be a direction? The moment I allowed myself to consider it seriously, something shifted inside me. The hallway did not change. The teachers did not change. But my perspective did. English class transformed first. Instead of writing essays to earn grades, I began experimenting with voice and clarity. History became a study of human choices, leadership, mistakes, courage, and consequence. Even math, which I once dismissed as pointless, became mental training for logic and focus. When you have a goal, you stop asking, "Is this required?" You start asking, "How can this strengthen me?" That subtle change creates powerful momentum. Without a goal, obstacles feel like proof you are not good enough. With a goal, obstacles feel like necessary resistance for growth. Without direction, discipline feels restrictive. With direction, discipline feels empowering. Without purpose, you compare yourself constantly. With purpose, you measure progress against your own vision. Do you see the contrast? One path leads to exhaustion. The other leads to expansion. I began waking up earlier, not because someone forced me, but because I wanted quiet time to write. I started reading beyond assignments, taking notes not for exams, but for understanding. I volunteered to present projects even when I felt nervous. Fear no longer stopped me because it had context. I was practicing the skills my future required. Each day felt connected to something larger than the moment. Here is the powerful truth I learned. Motivation does not come first. Decision comes first. When you decide who you are becoming, your habits begin to align. Your focus sharpens. Your energy organizes itself. You stop drifting through education and start using it intentionally. The same classroom that once felt suffocating becomes a workshop for growth. Let me ask you something directly. Are you studying to avoid disappointment, or are you studying to build something meaningful? Are you completing assignments because you must, or because they are shaping you into someone capable? If your current habits continue unchanged, where will they lead you in 5 years? 10. Is that destination inspiring or merely acceptable? The difference between a student with a goal and a student without one does not appear dramatic at first. Both attend class. Both take exams. Both experience stress. But inside their minds, everything is different. One waits for instructions. The other seeks opportunities. One avoids difficulty. The other embraces it. One fears failure as identity loss. The other treats failure as information. I am not claiming the journey became easy. There were still days when I doubted myself. There were moments when progress felt invisible. There were nights when exhaustion tempted me to quit. But even in those moments, I understood something new. I was no longer surviving school. I was constructing a future. Effort had meaning. Struggle had direction. And that changed everything. The more I reflected on the difference between drifting and aiming, the more I began to see it everywhere around me. It was in the way students walked through the hallway, some moving quickly with quiet determination, others wandering in loose circles, laughing loudly but glancing at the clock every few minutes. It was in the way classmates talked about the future, some describing clear steps and timelines, others responding with a casual, "I'll figure it out later." I used to be the second type. I used to believe that clarity would magically arrive one day, like a letter in the mail announcing my destiny. But clarity is not delivered. It is built. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to stay busy? You can fill every hour with tasks, obligations, meetings, assignments, and still avoid the one question that matters most. Where am I going? Busyness creates the illusion of progress. You check boxes. You submit work. You attend lectures. But movement without direction is just motion. A car driving in circles burns fuel, but it never reaches a destination. I realized that for years I had been burning energy without aiming it. Once I chose a direction, even a tentative one, my attention began filtering information differently. In psychology class, I leaned forward when we discussed human behavior and decision-making. I asked questions not to impress the teacher, but because I genuinely wanted to understand how people think and why they act the way they do. In public speaking assignments, I felt a spark of fear mixed with excitement. Instead of rushing through presentations, I practiced tone, pacing, eye contact. I studied great speakers online, analyzing how they structured stories and built emotion. I wasn't chasing applause. I was sharpening tools. There is a profound emotional difference between pressure and purpose. Pressure feels heavy. It pushes down on you from the outside. It says, "You must do this or you will disappoint someone." Purpose feels expansive. It pulls you forward from within. It says, "You get to do this because it builds who you are becoming." When I studied out of pressure, my chest felt tight. When I studied out of purpose, my mind felt alive. The workload did not shrink. My relationship to it changed. I began experimenting with a new habit. Before starting any assignment, I would pause and ask, how does this connect to my long-term growth? Sometimes the connection was obvious. Writing essays improved clarity. Research projects strengthened critical thinking. Group work trained communication and patience. Other times the connection required creativity. A statistics project became an opportunity to learn how to present data visually. A biology lab became practice in explaining complex processes in simple language. When you deliberately search for relevance, you often find it. What surprised me most was how my confidence shifted. Before, my self-worth rose and fell with grades. A high score meant I felt capable. A low score meant I felt inadequate. My identity was fragile because it was tied to outcomes. After choosing a direction, my identity became rooted in growth. A disappointing result no longer meant I was failing as a person. It meant I had discovered a weakness to strengthen. Instead of asking, "Am I smart enough?" I started asking, "What skill can I improve?" Have you ever watched two athletes train? One shows up casually, doing the minimum required, leaving as soon as practice ends. The other arrives early, stays late, studies technique, analyzes mistakes. At first their performance may look similar, but over months and years the gap becomes dramatic. The difference is rarely raw talent. It is intention. The same principle applies to learning. Students with goals train differently. They reflect. They adjust. They persist when progress feels slow. There were still evenings when doubt whispered in my ear. What if this direction is wrong? What if you are not good enough? What if you fail publicly? Fear does not disappear when you find purpose. It changes form. But here is what I discovered. Fear is easier to confront when you have something meaningful at stake. When I was drifting, fear paralyzed me because there was no reason to endure discomfort. When I had a vision, discomfort became part of the path. Growth demanded it. I remember submitting a writing piece to a local competition for the first time. My hands trembled slightly as I pressed the button to send it. The old version of me would have avoided that risk entirely. Why invite rejection? Why expose imperfection? But the new version of me understood something deeper. If I wanted to grow as a communicator, I had to step beyond safe boundaries. Weeks later, when the results arrived, I did not win. For a brief moment, disappointment washed over me. But it was different from before. It did not attack my identity. It fueled my determination. I reread my submission, analyzed weaknesses, asked for feedback, and began revising. That was growth in motion. Purpose also reshaped my daily routine. I became more protective of my time, not in an obsessive way, but in a conscious one. I reduced hours spent mindlessly scrolling. I limited conversations that revolved around gossip and negativity. I sought environments that challenged me. The interesting part is this: I did not feel deprived. I felt aligned. When your actions match your direction, discipline feels less like sacrifice and more like strategy. Look around at any classroom and you will see the quiet contrast playing out. A student without a goal often asks, "Is this going to be on the test?" A student with a goal asks, "How can I apply this?" One avoids extra work. The other seeks depth. One feels trapped by requirements. The other uses requirements as structure. Over a single week, the difference appears small. Over several years, it becomes life-changing. There is also an emotional resilience that grows from clarity. When you know what you are building, temporary setbacks lose their power. A difficult semester becomes a challenge to navigate, not a verdict on your potential. A critical comment becomes guidance, not humiliation. You develop patience because you understand that mastery takes time. Have you ever tried to build anything meaningful overnight? It rarely works. Why do we expect our future to form instantly without deliberate effort? I sometimes imagine two parallel versions of my life. In the first version, I never stopped to ask deeper questions. I continued studying just enough, graduating with moderate achievement, entering a career chosen for convenience rather than conviction. Perhaps I would earn stability. Perhaps I would appear successful. But internally, I suspect there would always be a quiet regret, a sense that I never fully explored my capacity. In the second version, the one I am living now, the path is less predictable. There are risks. There are moments of uncertainty. But there is alignment. There is engagement. There is a growing sense that my effort contributes to something meaningful. Which life would you choose? The safe drift or the intentional climb? The routine built by default or the path shaped by design? You do not need perfect certainty to begin. You need enough clarity to take the next step. Direction can evolve. Goals can refine. But drifting unconsciously steals years silently. Time does not announce its departure. It simply moves. As I continued this journey, I realized something powerful about education itself. School is not merely about information. Information is everywhere. Education is about transformation. It is about who you become through disciplined practice, reflection, and challenge. Without a goal, education feels external. With a goal, it becomes deeply personal. It becomes the construction of character, competence, and confidence. So ask yourself again, not casually, but honestly, what are you building? When you open your textbook tonight, are you reacting to pressure, or are you investing in your future self? The answer to that question determines more than your next grade. It shapes your trajectory. And trajectories, though subtle at first, define destinies over time. There came a moment when I realized that the real transformation was not happening in my grades or even in my skills, but in my identity. I was no longer asking, "What do I have to do today?" I was asking, "Who am I becoming through what I do today?" That shift sounds small when spoken aloud, but internally it rearranged everything. Identity drives behavior. Behavior repeated daily builds destiny. If you see yourself as someone who is merely trying to survive school, you will act accordingly. If you see yourself as someone in training for a meaningful future, your standards quietly rise. Have you ever noticed how differently you behave when something truly matters to you? When the outcome connects to your deeper values, your focus sharpens. Distractions lose some of their power. You still feel temptation, you still feel fatigue, but your decisions begin aligning with a bigger picture. That is what purpose does. It does not remove difficulty. It reorganizes it. I began thinking long-term in ways I never had before. Instead of obsessing over the next exam, I asked, "What kind of thinker do I want to be in 5 years?" Instead of fearing public speaking nerves, I asked, "What kind of communicator do I want to become by the time I graduate?" Those questions stretched my perspective. They pulled me beyond short-term discomfort and into long-term vision. And something fascinating happened. My anxiety decreased. Why? Because when you stretch your timeline, one bad day loses significance. There were still setbacks. There were presentations where my voice shook slightly. There were essays that came back with more corrections than compliments. There were moments when I compared myself to others who seemed further ahead. Comparison is a subtle trap. It whispers that everyone else is progressing faster, achieving more, moving confidently while you hesitate. But here's what I learned. Comparison only steals energy when you lack direction. When you have a clear goal, you measure yourself against your own progress, not someone else's timeline. I started tracking growth differently. Instead of only recording grades, I recorded skills improved, books completed, feedback received, fears confronted. I wrote reflections after major projects, asking myself what worked, what failed, what could be refined. Reflection became a tool for acceleration. Many students complete tasks and immediately move on. They rarely pause to extract lessons. But growth hides inside reflection. When you examine your experience honestly, you convert mistakes into instruction. There is also a deeper emotional shift that happens when you live with intention. You begin trusting yourself. Not blindly, not arrogantly, but steadily. You make decisions aligned with your values instead of reacting to every external opinion. Friends may question your focus. Some may not understand why you decline certain distractions. But when your direction is clear, you do not need constant approval. Internal clarity replaces external validation. One evening, after a long week of assignments, I sat alone at my desk feeling exhausted. The old voice returned briefly. "This is too much. Why are you pushing so hard?" I closed my eyes and imagined the version of myself 5 years in the future. Confident, skilled, articulate, impactful. I asked a simple question. What would he thank me for doing today? The answer was immediate. He would thank me for not quitting. He would thank me for practicing when it felt inconvenient. He would thank me for choosing growth over comfort. That perspective re-energized me. Purpose creates a bridge between present effort and future reward. Without that bridge, effort feels isolated. With that bridge, effort feels connected. Have you ever built something with your own hands? Maybe it was a small project, a piece of art, a personal achievement. The satisfaction does not come only from the final result. It comes from knowing that each step mattered. Education works the same way when aligned with purpose. As months turned into years, the compounding effect became visible. My writing improved noticeably. My confidence in presentation strengthened. My curiosity expanded beyond requirements. Teachers began recognizing not just performance, but engagement. Opportunities emerged because I was prepared to step into them. That is another truth about goals. When you prepare intentionally, opportunities that once intimidated you become invitations. I do not want to romanticize this journey. There were sacrifices. There were social events I skipped. There were evenings when I chose practice over entertainment. But the sacrifices felt strategic, not resentful. There is a difference between forced restriction and chosen discipline. One breeds frustration. The other builds pride. Sometimes I think about students who are still drifting, not because they lack intelligence, but because they have never paused long enough to ask deeper questions. No one teaches you how to choose a direction. It requires courage. It requires honesty. It requires admitting that following the crowd may lead you somewhere average. Are you willing to step away from autopilot? Are you willing to sit in silence and confront uncertainty long enough to discover what truly matters to you? The world constantly pulls your attention outward. Notifications flash. Trends change. Opinions multiply. Without a clear internal compass, you are easily redirected. But when you define who you are becoming, decisions simplify. Not easy, but clear. Clarity reduces friction. It channels energy. It transforms education from obligation into preparation. If I could speak to my younger self, the version lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I would not give him a perfect roadmap. I would give him better questions. What excites you deeply? What problems do you want to help solve? What kind of impact feels meaningful? And then I would tell him this. Choose a direction, even if imperfect. Commit to it long enough to grow. Adjust when necessary, but do not drift unconsciously. Because drifting is subtle. It does not announce itself loudly. It feels comfortable. It feels safe. You tell yourself there is still time. You promise that clarity will come later. But years pass quietly. Habits solidify. Comfort zones harden. And one day you may look back wondering when you surrendered your agency. Purpose, on the other hand, feels demanding at first. It asks more of you. It stretches you. It exposes weaknesses. But it also awakens something powerful. It reminds you that your life is not an accident of circumstances. It is a construction project. Every day you are either adding bricks intentionally or letting random winds shape the structure. So tonight, when you sit down with your assignments, pause for a moment. Breathe. Ask yourself honestly, am I surviving or am I building? Am I reacting or am I designing? The answers may not change instantly, but the willingness to ask them marks the beginning of transformation. Education without purpose is motion without meaning. Education with purpose is momentum toward identity. And identity, shaped daily through small disciplined choices, becomes destiny over time.